This is Allison Dorr filling in for Jeff Samet, and joining us now is the director of a feature-length documentary film that will be seen at the Atlantic Film Festival this month, and a really important story about Canadians trying to get their voices heard. Please welcome to the show the director of Only 78, Jawad Mir. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Well, tell everybody what Only 78 is about.
Only 78 is a feature documentary that chronicles about 3.5 to 4 years long story of a small village with 78 people and their fight against the federal government to get their seawall repaired, which protects them from hurricanes and whatnot, and before time runs out.
And I didn't know, and I would imagine a lot of Canadians don't know anything about this story. And watching it, even just seeing the trailer, it's a really moving situation and a real wake-up call for a lot of us that there are people in this country that are being left behind, in a sense.
Absolutely. And just like you said, a lot of Canadians don't know. And, if we go back in time in 2013, the spring, I didn't know about this until I ran across an article, and it kind of just went from there. And then learning about not just one community, but multiple, and then, getting into this whole thing that there are hundreds of coastal communities that are under a similar threat because of climate change and whatnot, and then having these small communities being ignored by the government, not for any political reasons or whatnot, just because they're an Asian community and whatnot. It's not something that is appropriate, and plus there's so much culture and heritage in the East Coast. I mean, across Canada, but especially if you go to the East Coast, and that's just being taken away essentially. Well,
and it almost seems like, the government was just sort of shuffling it back and forth, going, well, it's not this department, it's not that one. And no one really seemed to be paying attention. Yeah.
So, when it all began, it just sort of started with the federal government saying that it's not their problem because the seawall rests on provincial land, even though it was the federal government that built it in 1946, and then they rebuilt it in 1983 after it was destroyed in a hurricane. And the provincial government would say it's not their problem. It just kind of went back and forth, but the village just would not want to take no for an answer, and they just fought, and they kept fighting.
And I think it's really important, too, because a lot of times people these days can feel like their voice is too small to really be heard by the government, and to look at, most of us, I think, can't imagine living in a place that only has 78 people in it.
Yep.
And then to know that they just really stuck together is such a beautiful thing.
It is. And, the film touches upon not just on that issue, but there's a lot of other layers of social acceptance and climate change. And, at the end of the day, one of the things that, growing up, you hear that, you keep on trying and, you will succeed. And I actually witnessed this myself over a span of 3.5 years, that it doesn't matter how small you are. You just got to keep going. I always use the analogy of the Energizer, the battery that keeps going and going, the bunny rabbit. I don't know if you remember seeing that.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
So you just got to keep going. And you mentioned the word, no matter how small you are. So we had a band from Cape Breton who actually composed and wrote an original song for the film. And all I sort of told the band, which is called the Keats, they're two sisters, that this is what I just want to send a message that no matter how small you are, you can make a difference. And that's pretty much what the song highlights. And it is a lesson not just for small communities, but even just us as individuals, that you just got to keep going. If that's what you want, you got to keep at it.
Well, when you first heard the story and thought that this was a story you wanted to tell as a filmmaker, who did you approach? And were the people in the town hesitant at all at first? Did you have to convince them, or were they, jazzed that someone wanted to help them? What was the situation?
I anticipate it to be very difficult. As Steve Jobs said, that all you have to do is pick up a phone and call, and that's literally what I did. I called the mayor's office in Cape Breton, and they put me in touch with Tim and Jean in Gavarus. I spoke to them, and they said, sure, we would love to help you. And I think there's a big factor in the story that's about social acceptance of people who are coming from outside and newcomers, and accepting them no matter how what color they are, what orientation they are, and whatnot. And when Tim and Jean said, no, you're more than welcome to, and we would love to have you, so we just kind of went down there, and they pretty much facilitated everything the first time. I think if it wasn't for them, the two lead characters in the film, it wouldn't have happened. And then after that, people saw the trailer, and they saw that, we were pretty serious about this, and everybody started welcoming us. Every time we went there, we had a place to stay, food to eat, and whatnot. So it was great. And that's what the message of the film is. When you accept others, in the light of what's going on in the United States right now, you can think magic happens, basically.
Well, and Tim and Jean are newer residents of the village, yes, relatively speaking, aren't they? And it's, it's also wonderful that they kind of fell in love with the place and took up the mantle of, we have to stick together and absolutely save this place.
And absolutely. And one of the things that is established in the very first few minutes of the film is that the crux of all that is that they're an interracial gay couple. Mm-hmm. And for them to be accepted in a small community like that, it's a pretty big thing, even in the time that we live in. Mm-hmm. And they have worked hard with other people like Heather and Barry, and in conjunction with the village, and they supported them and they backed them, and you just keep going. I know it sounds very cliche, but that's pretty much what it is. You just got to keep going.
It's beautiful, and it's an unfortunate yet a very timely story to tell right now, because if we look at the two hurricanes in the United States, it's also has that aspect of, we know it's very easy for coastal places to get flooded and have so much damage, and protecting a really historical site for this country, not only the home of these people, but also, a place that goes back 300 years and has a lot of history for people, is so important. Absolutely.
And I'm glad that you mentioned that, because I think one of the things that we, as people who live in great metropolitan areas, whether it's in Canada, U.S., U.K., wherever, we kind of take for what we have for granted. And we kind of, when you said it's a small story, nobody heard about it. And even if we did, we will just say, oh, how is it going to affect us? Mm-hmm. But we fail to understand that climate change is affecting all of us, whether we like it or we don't like it. And, it could be indirect effect through economy, through job loss, and so many other things. And there's always this talk in U.S. and across the world, climate change deniers and climate change believers. I believe that we need to sort of stop being too concerned about the people who don't believe it, mm-hmm, but be more concerned about people who believe it and who are actually doing something about it. And, everything starts very small. You can do something very small for the environment, and if we all start doing that, it will help the planet to go back to the way it was, maybe even 20, 30 years ago. So that's one of the things that, I want to make sure that people realize that just because it's affecting a small community doesn't mean that it's not going to have any effect on us. And then tomorrow, it may not happen. It probably will happen to us. 21 of the 22 major cities across the world are coastal, mm-hmm, and it's a pretty scary thing if you think about it with the climate change. Over time, it may not affect our generation, but definitely the next one.
And we all, right now, especially in the world and in North America, we talk a lot about, being proud of your country. And it's important for us to remember that, yes, we might feel like that doesn't touch us, but those are our fellow Canadians. That is part of our country. That is, our brothers and sisters. And so we do have to remember the effects of them as well. And to, I mean, really take care of everyone in the country as a whole.
Absolutely, and that's the thing. It kind of serves the title "Only 78." It doesn't matter how many people there are, how many lives are at stake. It could be one. One life is very significant, and we have to take care of people, different communities and different backgrounds, different orientation. Whether we agree with them or not agree with them doesn't really matter. We just have to look after each other, and if we start doing that, everything else, will fall into place.
Yeah. Now, we should say the Atlantic Film Festival does start today and run for the next week. And so for any of our listeners who are down there, it is you're showing on Sunday?
Yes, Sunday, September 17th at 12:30 p.m.
And such a great story, and really an important story in the Canadian landscape. So I hope you get a great turnout. Now, will everyone come from Gabarus?
Some people are. We actually had a private, kind of like, I wouldn't even call it private. It was supposed to be a private screening inside a church in Sydney, Nova Scotia. And it got some publicity, and 300 people showed up from across Cape Breton, not just from the village. And the film received a standing ovation. Most people have seen it from the village. Some are coming again and bringing their friends and family members. But, we're hoping to get audience that is in Halifax that may not, even though they are in Nova Scotia, they may not have be aware of Gabu's story. And a lot of people don't. A lot of people don't have a clue what happened in the last 4 years with this small village. Oh,
I hope that you get a great turnout, and everyone in Halifax who's listening now, please go check it out. Only 78. Jawad Mir, director, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
And best of luck to you and with the film.